Good afternoon, dear colleagues. This is the afternoon session dedicated to an exchange between academia and practitioners in the NGO scene related to water, weather, and climate services. Before we start, may I ask Johanna to give us some technical instructions on how to conduct this exchange.
Yes, of course. And hello also from my side. Before we start, I would like to share shortly some technical information and housekeeping rules. So please keep your microphone closed if you're not speaking. But if you can, if internet allows, turn on your camera so that we can also see you. If necessary, rename yourself in Zoom so that your name and organization is shown. And we would like to make this presentation, this session, as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please ask them anytime in the chat, and also raise your hand for discussion if you have inputs or questions. I can already see that we have colleagues who speak Spanish. Probably there are also colleagues who speak Spanish, sorry. Just French translation was only this morning. So this afternoon we have the session in English, but it is translated to Spanish. So for those of you who need the translation, make sure that you go to the icon interpretation in the toolbar of Zoom and choose Spanish. Last but not least, I would like to mention that all sessions are recorded. Also, this session here will be available on the platform's video channel, which is easy findable through our website, drrplatform.org. With that, I hand over back to Ernst.
Thank you, Johanna. Yes, I'm back. And this is our afternoon session. It is called Water and Weather Climate Service in Practice and Assessed by Academia. And the objective is that NGOs active in water, weather, and climate services share insight with academic authors of the WWCS relevant evaluations and impact assessments. And the rationale of inserting such a session is, of course, to compare the viewpoints from academia and also from NGO practitioners, and to gain enrichment from this exchange. The first speaker is, as he was also this morning, Dr. Emmanuel Atto. He is a researcher and climate adaptation specialist at the International Water Management Institute in Colombo. And the title is, as this morning, Making Climate Services Actionable for Farmers in Ghana, the Value of Co-Production and Knowledge Integration, Indigenous Knowledge and Climate Governance. With this, I am glad to give the floor to Emmanuel. Please proceed.
All right, thank you very much, Ernst. Can you give me access to share my screen?
Yes.
For this, Ernst, you would have to stop sharing, and that would allow Emmanuel to share. Great.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
You see my screen, I guess, now? Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
All right. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you guys to really talk about how we can use the value of co-production and knowledge integration to improve climate information services for farmers. And wherever you're joining us from, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. So I will spend the next couple of minutes trying to talk about the background of this research outcome, how we did it, what we found out, say insights that we generated from this research, conclusion, and then also which direction can we take going forward in terms of research. So typically, the narrative of climate change, whether it's happening or not, is already established. But the question is, aside mitigating the change, what can we do to survive the adverse impacts on our lives? Economically, it is estimated that by 2030, almost about 30 billion USD is what the impact of water and climate-related disasters are going to be like in Africa. And when you look at the historical trend, it has not declined, but in about 12.5 billion, for example, was estimated for the period of 2010 to 2019. So the situation is particularly serious when it comes to the agriculture sector, with wildfire, drought, and flood across board. When you look at the challenge, it's all revolving around the unpredictability of rainfall. And so farmers are not able to make decisions because they're not able to predict when and by how much rainfall is going to happen or come. The models are advanced, but yet they are limited in the kind of information they give with respect to the time, the accuracy, and therefore is unusable to a larger extent by some farmers, especially those which we talk about in northern Ghana. So consequently, farmers rely more on their indigenous knowledge. Now, aside the knowledge they rely on, there is also a problem with the approach with which climate services is generated. Conventionally, we have one directional approach where researchers and information producers generate information and then give it to users to use. But we realize that this approach is filled with mistrust, unreliability, and also unacceptability by the farmers and users in general. So there's a call for two-directional model of climate services where the co-production actually comes in. With this, it's built within the principle of inclusiveness, collaborativeness, and also flexibility, where researchers or let's say producers like NGOs and that of users co-explore the problems of climate information services, they co-design the solutions, they co-create a solution, and then try to co-evaluate it to produce a service that is more demand-driven, trusted, and then timely. So let me delve down into a case scenario, having given you this background to the presentation. So our work is made, we did the work in the north of Ghana, some in the middle belt, and also in the southern part, but I want to focus more on the north of Ghana. So then those of you who don't know north of Ghana, or Ghana itself, is generally a tropical savanna, the region of the northern Ghana, and it has a raining period between May to October, with only one major rainy season with a long spread of dry season from November to April. It has a huge amount of annual rainfall of about 750 to 1,050 millimeters. And the region is also very endowed with the one main irrigation system, which is the public one. Now, the farmers on the irrigation scheme practice both irrigated and also rain-fed. I'm giving you this background so that when I proceed with the presentation, you already have an idea of the kind of farmers and the situation we're talking about. So when it comes to when it comes to climate information services in the region, the Ghana Meteo Agency and also some private companies like ISOCO provide this information. But whether it is being used or not is where the major issue is. We started this around 2016, thinking that we are going to provide a very important information to farmers. By this, I mean, providing them with climate and weather information from the state-of-the-art ECMWF, which is an European multi-symbol model. But when we got to the field, these farmers told us that we don't use scientific forecasts from meteorological agencies. So the question is, why don't you use it then? They were quick to tell us that we don't use them because they are not accurate, they are not reliable. So we asked ourselves, then what do you use? They use indigenous indicators to make predictions of this rate. So how can we understand these indigenous indicators? Not through a certain kind of descriptive anthropological way, but in a more quantitative or semi-quantitative way, trying to make a case for that knowledge so that we can combine it with our scientific forecast in order to improve climate information services. So that is basically the story behind this presentation. So how do we go about it? Before I go to the methodologies that we adopted, I want to talk about the problem on the ground. So typically, a farmer that you find in Ghana, he wakes up and in preparation to plant his crops, he look into the air and start thinking about what the season will look like. So in some cases, he plants his seeds and they're thinking that the rain is going to come and there's no rain. Sometimes he plants the seeds and thinking that sometimes he thinks there'll be no rain and then there's a lot of rain. So there's flood, there's drought. But not only the farmers, but also irrigation water managers also suffer a lot about which kind of irrigation method should they adopt. Should they adopt pumping using electricity, or they can just rely on gravity because there's a lot of water in the reservoir. So if they can't produce the amount of water in the reservoir, then or in the river, then they become confused as to what to do. Even the Ghana Meteorological Agency, the information that they put online is not something that farmers can really use for their own decision making. So with this, we identify these key gaps. What are the socio-ecological issues that are promoting or hindering CS use, climate services use, or climate services generally in the region? There's also limited knowledge on how to integrate indigenous and scientific forecasts together to improve climate information services. And the last one, the mismatch between the forecast information that is given and the needs of the farmers on the ground. So as a result, we decided to embark on the journey of trying to improve the reliability and acceptability of climate information services to support farmer decision making. How do we do that? We created this simple research question. The research question actually is about captured the whole value chain, particularly the design and operation of climate information services, how that can be improved through co-production, working together with farmers, and even integrating multiple sources of knowledge in order to generate knowledge that is very actionable or usable for farmer decision making. So as you can see, we framed the sub-questions around the design, the knowledge that is created, and the knowledge that is uptake. So for the design, we ask ourselves, how can virtual platforms and citizen science help in improving CIS delivery and even the forecast accuracy? And when you come to actionable knowledge creation, we talk, how can we make this knowledge available to farmers? And how does it impact their decision-making on the ground? And the last of it is, if we integrate indigenous and scientific forecasts together, can we even improve the accuracy, the acceptability, and even the reliability? So to answer this question, we decided to embark on a mixed method approach, starting from 2016 to 2020, because the first phase, we have to combine a lot of methods, starting from literature review to understand and diagnose the whole problem, doing interviews and surveys to be able to identify information needs, using responsible innovation framework to evaluate the framework that we are proposing as a new generation of climate information services, and then even using focus group discussion and workshops to be able to validate the outcomes of what we have done, and also solicit opinions and ideas from farmers. We also use virtual platform coding, scripting, coding, teaching farmers or training farmers on how to use these mobile apps as well. So let me move a little bit to this. So we are trying to identify the value of indigenous forecast combined with scientific forecast. So I wouldn't really talk much about the scientific forecast part where we did verification analysis and all that, because this indigenous forecast system allow us to co-produce and also allow us to have knowledge from a different source. So let me base more of my presentation on that. So understanding the techniques of indigenous forecasting was one of the first things. We held a workshop, a meeting with the farmers. We try to identify the ecological indicators that the farmers use. And then in trying to identify these indicators, we try to use perceptional approach for them to reliably predict which of the forecast indicators are really accurate. We also develop a mental model to appreciate the understanding of how each indicator contributes to a particular rainfall event. Now, the next thing was to develop a mobile app and then train these farmers to send us their daily weather forecast. We needed some simple mobile app so we can categorize, we can keep record of these data sets. We also developed this rain gauge, as you can see here, to collect the observation so we can compare the observation against the forecast that they are giving us to know whether it is accurate or it's not. So this is more like a feedback section where we try to validate the results, and I try to also collect farmers' seasonal forecast ahead of the season, because that is only one, collected only once. Seasonal forecast is collected maybe at the beginning of the season, but daily forecast, of course, it comes in every now and then. So we coded a mobile app, and basically a farmer is supposed to predict whether yes or no rain, and what kind of rain it is, low rain, medium rain, or high rain. And then he's supposed to look at these indicators to actually make a predictions of the rain, whether he look at the sun, the birds, whatever he looked at, and then the degree of certainty the farmer needs to also add that to the prediction, and then he saves. Now, all these things on the mobile app was agreed upon at the workshop. They know what the low rain is, what the high rain is. We try to explain this using their own context, so they knew this. And we actually wrote a script using an HTML Sapele platform. So that is it. Now, what did we find out? Quickly, we developed this framework for the second generation of climate information services. And the second generation in the sense that we are not only relying on scientific forecasts, but we are also relying on indigenous forecasts. And through citizen science, these farmers are able to send us these forecasts. And then using an ICT as a medium, we're able to automate the data handling, collection, and visualization. And then this actually then produce a hydro or water climate information that is actionable enough for farmers to make their own decision. So this is more like a basic architecture. Now, the results for the kind of techniques the farmers use, I mean, typically anthropological scholars will try to describe that farmers use these kind of indicators and all that, but we move a step further to try to quantify the skills in that. So I don't want you to read all this because the links available for this paper is already published, but let me cite an example of an indicator that they use for weather forecast. So for example, earthworm, you see that the appearance of large number of earthworms on the day is a sign of rain the next day or in a few hours. And when it comes to seasonal climate forecast also, let's say hot weather, the high temperature that causes people to sweat profusely during the period of March actually indicates whether the onset of the rain is in a few weeks or not. So those are some of the example indicators from the weather and also for seasonal forecast. The next one was, can we identify the link between these indicators and the kind of weather condition that they predict? So first of all, we use what we call the mental model. Now, what does the mental model do? The mental model basically allows us, Okay, so the mental model basically allows us to try to predict the relationship, the degree allow us to understand the thought process of people and how they predict, how they make certain decisions in a more semi-quantitative kind of way. So the thickness of these arrows indicate the degree upon which a particular ecological indicator around here relate with the type of rainfall that is here. So if you take, for example, the hot weather, it has a very thin line connecting to low rain than it connects to medium rain. And if you take even ants, for example, also, so the lines are it's more equal to low rain and also the same to medium rain, but has no relationship compared to high rain. So that is the kind of thing we did for the daily weather forecast. The same thing, so this is more like a summary of that you can find. So mosquitoes, it is low, high, or medium relationship, high relationship or low relationship, you can find this. So the same thing we did for seasonal forecast, which is mostly predicting the onset, above normal rain, below normal rain, and the normal rain also. So these are the indicators, and then these are the parameters which we try to look at their relationship. Quickly, let me move to the next analysis that we did. How reliable are these indicators? Apart from, like I said earlier, we allow the farmers to tell us how reliable the indicators are from perceptional point of view. But we also did a quantitative analysis or empirical analysis of the data that we collected from them, from the mobile phone. We found that the most reliable indicator was butterfly, and interestingly, it's actually the least used. And then the hot weather is actually the most used, and then the least reliable indicator was soil. Now, as a result of a changing environmental and climate conditions, these indicators also erodes over time or decline. So butterfly was one of our curious. How can the least used be the most reliable? So for them, a lot of butterfly, the number of butterflies in the communities are declining, even though they are one of the indicators that they really use. So they keep on adjusting these indicators over time. Mosquitoes were previously not used, but in the current time where we visited there, they have already started observing mosquito for some time, and they are using that indicators for predictions. We went further. Aside yes or no rain, we wanted to know the accuracy of these indicators in predicting low rain and medium rain and high rain. So when it comes to low rain forecast, ant was most reliable. Medium rain forecast, cow, duck, and fork were the most reliable. High rainfall forecast, most reliable were earthworm and then wind. So typically, those are the results that we obtain for the indicators. Now we move further to see the kind of observed data that farmers gave us when it comes to using their rain gauge. Was it also having a good quality? Now the red line indicates the average of all the farmers' data rainfall they give us. Meanwhile, that of the farmers, as you can see here, some of the farmers predicted very high they observe very high amounts of rain, where others reserve very small amounts of rain. But what is our interest is to look at the trends. So the beginning, like I said, the trend of the rainfall often starts from April and then peaks somewhere July, August, and drop to October. So we could see those trends. So it also gives us some confidence that what the farmers are actually collecting for us in terms of observed rainfall is something we can rely upon. We also went further to look at the rainy days. And what we noticed is that for the rainy days, the farmers' number of rainy days were less than that of the meteorological agency. And this is expected because the rain gauges are very sensitive to the least amount of rain, even as at 0.1 millimeters. But farmers do not have that kind of capabilities to detect such amounts of rain. So we also know very well that when rain falls 1 kilometer away from us, sometimes there's no rain there. So all these kind of spatial variability have contributed to the differences in the kind of rain that was recorded. So those are for daily observation. Now let's move on to seasonal forecast observation. Once again, don't worry yourself trying to appreciate this. But what I want to explain here is that the farmers use also their indigenous indicators to predict onset, like I showed you. But typically, when we compare farmers and GMET, the rainfall onset, 33% was right for the farmers, and then GMET, 42% accurate for each of the communities. But when it comes to the amounts and that of rainfall cessation, the farmers did better. In fact, Ghana Meteorological Agency did not get the rainfall cessation, that is the end of the rainfall season, right in any of the communities. So we noticed that seasonal forecast was very difficult to predict. Even when it comes to rainfall cessation at the end of the season, about 3 months away or 4 months away from the beginning, farmers are not able to use indicators to predict. So they actually rely on their previous experiences of the last year or two to make their predictions. Now that we know the accuracy of these indicators, we wanted to also go forward to see if we combine the two, what will be the results? So having analyzed the daily rainfall from the farmers and that of the scientific forecast from GMET, we noticed 1/3. We noticed that we're able to correctly predict 1/3 of the rainfall, right? That is on the average, but on a single basis, some farmers can predict as much as 60% right, up to 70% correct. Now, what this introduces is that in some cases, indigenous forecasts may be correct, scientific forecasts may not be. Sometimes the opposite happens. So how do we combine the two of them? Looking at this scenario, indigenous forecast was better than scientific forecast, but then the integrated forecast performed better than all of them. So this gives us an idea that when we integrate them, we get better results. Now moving to the seasonal forecast also, from 2017 forecast, indigenous forecast predicted a near normal or 58% probability. Scientific forecast also above normal, and then integrated forecast near normal. At the end of the season, near normal was what was observed. So it tells you the quality of integrated forecast and that of the indigenous forecast. 2018 was very strange also, but interesting. 50% probability for indigenous forecast. That says that it's going to be above normal. When we came to the scientific forecast, it was very confusing, 35. So it's not sure what kind of season is going to be like. But that of the integrated probability also predicted above normal. At the end of the day, it was above normal rainfall that was observed. So it tells us how good the integrated probability forecast is and also the indigenous forecast is. Now, when it comes to actionable knowledge generation, so going to the second result, farmers are in the center of different information sources. Farmer to farmer, commercial radio, community radio, commercial radio, mobile base. But we notice that farmer to farmer systems contribute the most actionable knowledge because farmers are able to interact, evaluate, and reevaluate the forecast among themselves to produce better results. Now, when it comes to decision-making among farmers, there are basically these 5 kind of stages: land preparation, planting, weed control, fertilizer, and harvesting. Water availability and climate variability plays a key role in this. And as a result of these variability, farmers have different options or decisions that they make. So if you come to land preparation, for example, farmers use tractor, they use a bullock, or they use a manual. Now, if they want to actually crop a very big land because they feel the season is better with more rain, they use tractors. But if they want a relatively small acre, they will use bullock, or maybe they use manual labor for just a small area because they know their season is actually going to be bad anyway. So such kind of decision-making and to adapt to water unavailability and then climate variability exists across the entire process. How even during planting, weed control. Now, this diagram, I wouldn't want you to bother again, but just to have the idea of how farmers at each stage of farming make those decisions. I'll give the papers out. You can read more about that. So we went further to see, okay, if you provide farmers with forecasts with different probability uncertainties, how are they able to use that to make decisions? For the seasonal forecast, farmers say they will act if you give them 1 month of information compared to 2 months and 3 months. Initially, we thought, okay, the longer the timeline, people will be interested in using, but that is not so. The same way, but when we come to farmers' preference for weekly, 1 week lead time, it's above that of 3 days and 1 day. All right. The result shows that when we integrated a forecast together, there's high potential for acceptability because it's reliable, resolve the conflict or the contradiction between indigenous forecasts and scientific forecasts. So this is a more like acceptability test that we run. A majority were in acceptance to it. So some lessons. We need to recognize indigenous knowledge as authentic or legitimate source of knowledge when we are developing our climate information service, especially for regions that do not have meteorological devices or very sophisticated kind of equipment. We need to promote engagement and participatory with local people. We need a platform that can help leverage data collection, at the same time engage people socially. Something that will also enhance communication of the knowledge the information, but that meets needs, not just developing information, but meeting needs. Capacity building was very essential throughout the whole process. And the next generation of climate information services need to have that. We shouldn't assume that farmers don't know much, because they know a lot. The only thing is that the understanding of particular concept is in their own, using their own environment and technologies could be different. We should foster knowledge co-production. Scientific knowledge is good, but there are other legitimate sources of knowledge that we can use. I want to make it clear a bit here is that with my experience, we should never go to the community thinking that farmers or users are victims of climate change, but they are also agents of adaptation. They can provide knowledge that is useful for us to adapt to the changing conditions. This is basically, let me conclude by saying this was a proof of concept. We do not have a long-term data because indigenous data set is even not stored anywhere or written anywhere compared to scientific forecasts. But in places where data is scarce, methodological instruments are not available, this information is very useful. Both indigenous and scientific forecasts have strength and also have weaknesses in a way that best of both worlds work, so we can integrate them. Our FPF method worked very well, and this is a method we can advance going forward. Now, if you go to these communities, some farmers can predict the weather better than others because they have better skills. However, most of those better forecasters do not have the motivation to provide you with a forecast. So you have to know how to motivate them as an institution to be able to give you what you want. Now, I want to recommend that going forward, research in areas such as intersectionality in terms of gender, age, how do they affect the use of climate information services? How does power in a community influence how people even access and use the information? We need to also advance the integration method that I have mentioned of by trying to bring in machine learning and collecting this data in a very extensive way so that we can improve our forecast. Mainstreaming these CIs or climate information into national frameworks is very key. If you want to ensure that the CIS is sustainable, then we need to really do that. Now, economic impact of climate information services. This afternoon, there was a session on that. Nice session to determine the benefits of climate information services, but that is from the scientific forecast. So what about us disintegrating it to include that of indigenous forecast as well? Sustainability is key, and we should be able to do some research on how to sustain the climate information services. Thank you very much. And Ernest, I hope my pace was a bit better than the previous. Yeah. So these are some of the publications that you can have a look and possibly read a bit more on the details of the research. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Really, the second time, I'm still more impressed by the experience you have been documented in Ghana. And I hope that also our colleagues from Latin America were able to grasp the essential. Now, if you would withdraw your slide, I would just show my introduction to the second part. Yes. Emmanuel has agreed to give a second presentation. We were very glad about this because this has saved us from short-term emergency because one of the contributors had to step out. And Emmanuel is commenting on a CGIAR platform, which is called AWARE, the early warning, early action, early finance platform, promoting early warning of and effective response to climate hazards. I suggest we listen to this presentation before we have then about a half an hour time for a discussion between NGO practitioners and Emmanuel as a representative of academia working on water, weather, and climate service. If you agree, then I again free the screen for the second presentation from Emmanuel.
Okay. Thank you. You have to stop sharing.
Yes, yes, I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm desperately trying. Can you help me?
Not from here, but
Not from, okay.
I did it.
Yeah, thank you.
There was a helping hand in the background.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Is it, can you all see now, I guess, right?
Yes, perfectly.
All right, so I will again spend a few number of minutes to try to explain a bit on what we have done on trying to support climate resilience through anticipatory action by developing an integrated system that is early warning, early action, and early finance. So still also I'm very lucky that I have the same audience anyway. So the same approach, typically the rationale behind that, the methodologies, the results, and then some lessons for practice, conclusion, and then we look at the future directions in terms of research. So of course, we all know that as a result of climate change, there is an increasing amount of flood and drought that is occurring across board, both global south and the north. And this is resulting in the consequential effects on socio-economic and even environmental instabilities and disruptions. And as a result of that, building climate resilience has become very important. And so early warning systems are considered as a very key tool in trying to build resilience of communities. It is definitely important because it's estimated that the universal access to an early warning system can help us save about $35 billion US dollars per year in reducing loss of assets and also well-being of people. Despite these importance, almost about 1 billion of people still do not have access to this early warning system, and 1/3 of the world's population still lack access. So it is based on this that the UN General Secretary, as most of you will know, called for a 5-year program for early warning system for all, and allocated about 3.1 billion to support this effort till the next 5 years, particularly in trying to develop early warning system that will be useful for everyone. Now, when we look at the current early warning systems, they have the structure of trying to identify risks and then monitor and the warnings and services, and also disseminate this warning and then response to the response capacity to the warnings, to build response capacity to the warnings. However, when you critically look at this early warning system, there are some challenges that are associated with them. The first one is that they are basically fragmented in nature, so that the warnings, the actions, and then the finance are more or less scattered. So there's no coherence in that, making it difficult for the warnings for the public to respond effectively to the warnings. The second one is that the collaboration that is required from institutions, from stakeholders is insufficient. So we are not able to mobilize the right people, the right resources to be able to deal with the warning, even if it's provided. There is also a gap between technological capabilities and how people in responding to this kind of warning that a technology is given, or the early warning system is provided. And of course, mismatch between the warning and the action is also very clear. The warning that we give and the action that we take sometimes are not. You'll be expecting certain low level of flood, and then there's a high level of flood, so the preparation for the flood is not as expected. So having this background information, let me move on to the anticipatory action. So with the early warning system comes anticipatory action. So the previous early warning and even the current early warning system try to react to some of these hazards by providing information. This anticipatory action is actually a new concept. And when you talk about anticipatory actions, some people call it early action or forecast-based action. It typically is about taking steps to protect, people before disaster really strikes. And when it comes to anticipatory action, it is just a collective action that indeed is done proactively. But we should not take anticipatory action as a substitute for long-term investment in risk reduction strategies, but rather we should consider it as part of an overall approach to managing climate risks. So if you look at this diagram very carefully, the vertical line is humanitarian need, and over time, the red line is typically the routes that the current practices are done, the current early warning practices are done. When there is a warning because of the shock, this is the extent of humanitarian need that is required. But I estimated that when the blue line, which is anticipatory action, is adopted, people react proactively or ahead of time. This is the extent to which it can reduce the impact. So just to give you an idea of how valuable AA or anticipatory action is. But of course, anticipatory action without early warning system, I've always said, is just like the human body without its senses. You can have the human body well organized and coordinated, but if it doesn't have the touch, the feel, and the smell, it's not able to anticipate what is coming. So the early warning is more important also. It's also very important in making that anticipatory action complete. So what is this anticipatory action? And the processes involved in anticipatory action is very clear. We have preparedness phase so assuming this red or the trigger, as you can see, before it happens, there is a preparedness phase, readiness phase, and even activation phase. The preparedness phase is a long-term preparation where you try to say, okay, before the coming of a hazard, let's try to form a national working group. Let's try to identify national frameworks that support the action that need to be taken. Let's try to identify community groups. All those earlier on decisions and let's even try to do some simulations to see whether the actions that we have planned is going to work. Let's try to prepare for pre-finance. All those things are preparedness phase, and typically takes between 6 to 9 months, even ahead of time. Now, the readiness phase is where you validate all these actions and decisions you have taken in the last months, and then even identify. So assuming there is flood or there is something, how do we actually, how do we get the beneficiaries that are really likely to be affected by this? You try to estimate that and even do some community consultations and orientation of the implementing partners, who is going to support what, who is going to hold care. In terms of Red Cross, you need Red Cross. I'll give you some examples of the work we have done where we have Red Cross district disaster management units. We have different organizations, even the military, the police were all present because of this AA process. Now, assuming the disaster strikes, they are depending on the extent of which you have done your AA, the recovery and the rehabilitation process become very easy. And so you can see, of course, there will be some search and rescue, but if you have done a proper AA, then those other ones will become less burdensome. Now, so for having this information in mind, the early warning system, the AA or anticipatory action, and the processes involved, let's talk a bit about how we developed our platform or our early warning, early action, early finance. The first thing we always do is to identify the gap between the knowledge gap. And it is critical. It was clear because there was no coherence between the warning, the responsive action, and the financial mechanisms. The warnings may come after the event, or sometimes there's no action preparing to deal with the warnings. And even when there is action and there is warning, there is no finance to support the activities. The second one is about the collaboration between institutions and stakeholders, which is very lacking. There's no partnership that will ensure active involvement. There is also difficulties even in translating these warnings. All right, despite the advancement in technology, there is a huge gap in how to translate these capabilities into effective public response, indicating a need for improved communication strategies and also how to end some education. So we adopted a co-production again with national partners. We try to hold workshops with the national partners, identifying their needs for early warning systems and trying to build from the grassroots. Here again, co-production is very central because I'm sure if most people working in the NGOs also are really pushing for the need for co-producing most of these services and the platform. So there's also data. The platform was data-driven and technologically driven. So we decided not to use our own data that is already available at the national level. So we needed the stakeholders at national level to collect this data set for us to use. Now, we therefore, based on this knowledge gap, and then the approaches, we wanted to develop the integrated early warning, early action, and early finance system that address these problems that we already identified. So what did we find? The first approach was trying to develop a framework for this new kind of integrated warning system. I don't want to bore you with a lot of theoretical concepts, but just a bit of explanation of this will be okay. So we started from the point of view that technology, early warning system, of course, includes technological capability, but it cannot be successful without identifying the social processes within the operational context. So it was important that we include the social processes even as we develop the technological platforms. So we use concepts like technological frames, interpretative flexibility. With technological frame, it's about how an individual or a group understands, based on its own values and beliefs, the perception of the technology you want to produce. So in theory, if you're able to have a better understanding of technological frame of a group of people who are going to use your device, then you'll be able to fine-tune the needs, your technology to suit their needs. Interpretative flexibility also simply means what that particular technology means to the people, and then how they will use the technology. And even this usage is based on different actors and how they interpret that technology. So now the boundary objects here simply means an object which is actually connecting it's actually serving as a connecting system. So objects with varied meaning. So people may see it as different kind of value. People may attach different value to it, bridging communication and coordination across different groups. So our early warning system, we thought could be termed as a boundary layer. Now, when it comes to social learning, we all know that with such system, it evolves. There should be need for feedback loop around the whole system. So we wanted to use a concept of social learning where co-creation of knowledge, sharing understanding by communication, and then reflection and feedback was very important. The last one was collaborative governance. And simply put, is like a principled kind of engagement, shared motivation, and joint action. So to explain a bit about this framework, the framework started from the context, as you can see, collaborative governance for building resilience against climate variability and extremes. And then with this content, there is also a process, which is the whole of this. And then there's also an outcome. So within the process, this is where the theories all must play a role. The first one and the second is technological and interpretative flexibility. Now, so these are actually coupled with, if you look at this, principled engagement, shared motivation, and joint action, that is more collaborative governance. Now, within this whole process is the early warning, early action, early finance, with AWARE, which is our dashboard that we are building, serving as a boundary object. It is important that this particular system that we are building, we try to position and consider factors such as economic, political situations, socio-cultural, and biophysical. In some situations, say, let's say, for example, in Sudan, or in any kind of war or conflict, fragile kind of settings, you need to consider this kind of socio-political settings, because you have to develop a system that is very sensitive to conflict situations. So this system is built with these kind of core political factors, sociocultural considerations into it. The last part I want to also lay emphasis, the last but one, is the users, experts, and then performance feedback. So these are the kind of feedback we also identify in the process. So the feedback runs from the context and then to the outcome, in the sense that every stage of this whole process needs to undergo, can be re-evaluated and reformulated and reframed. Now, what are the outcomes? We expect two key kind of outcomes. There can be relational outcome and also problem outcome. Relational outcome, as it says, is very direct. For example, we can actually improve basic things like institutional capacity and collaboration, how institutions relate with each other. The term relational just came from the word relational, relationship, like we already know, or how we can address trust issues and improve accountability in the system, how we can include everybody in social equity and even create awareness. But when it comes to the problem outcome, as we term it, it's basically improving the quality of the warning in the system itself, better integration of the warning, the action, and finance. We also believe that with this process, we can improve anticipatory action, resilience to climate extremes can be built, and then rapid emergency response and recovery. So there is a context to this framework. You have to know whether that's your context. The processes involved need to be done clearly. And with this process, you have to also look at the kind of setting, like the economic and the political situations. Now, with this framework being the basis of our platform, let me move to the next slide. So now we have AWARE. And what is really the AWARE? That is what we built, the early warning, the early action, and early finance platform. So as indicated earlier on by ENS, it is actually part of a CGL, that's one of the largest agricultural international research organizations in the world, to build climate resilience for people, especially those in highly vulnerable communities. So as part of this project, we developed this AWARE to focus on Guatemala, Kenya, Morocco. You can see different from Africa to South America and even Sri Lanka. So that we'll be able to experiment as a starting point, but later it can be upscaled to different parts of the world. Now, the warning, the AWARE has what we call the early warning, the sectoral, you can say the right side, sectoral climate risks. Sectoral climate risks here is about, in case there is flood, what are the market risks, what are the health risks, what are the nutrition risks, what are the population displacement risks. So all those things are the risks. Then also we have early action, early finance, and there's some bullets. I'll go to the website for you to have a look. And some online bulletin and user guides that can help you. But it was actually aimed towards governments and then humanitarian agencies and funders, and not maybe individuals can also use it, but the idea is for them to make that decision. For us, it also helps us facilitate the identification of communities that are at risk. It has some tools embedded in it to help in doing that. So what is the data structure, and then what is the data sources and structure within AWARE? So within AWARE, you find, first of all, the data was drawn from models, satellites, government agencies, humanitarian agencies, the World Bank, many sources of data set. Now, the risks, first, what you see is the first thing is the risk identification. What risks are we going to have based on the early warning? And then we develop an early action, and then we also come out with the early finance. Now, within it, you find what we call a community livelihood and physical asset. We have sample of all those basic livelihood and physical assets that you have to consider. It's up to each community or each country to select which one is suited to that particular context that they are in. Now we have direct and indirect likely impacts of a particular hazard, whether flood or not. You have to also use your own discretion on your country to select which kind of impact you think is going to have. But we already provided this as samples. With the possible anticipatory action, we also have to identify some of them that can help you resolve some of the pending hazards. Now, it also included a financial mechanism. You develop a whole report containing how much you need for each activity. And then at the end of the day, it generates for you the total amount of money you need in terms of USD or whatever currency you have. But of course, it has local currency converted to USD as well. So depending on where you are. So basically, that is the structure and the support that Aware actually have given. Let me say this as an example. If you're in a community where about 4,000 people are, and their livestock depends on their livelihood depends on livestock rearing, and then they have substandard roads, water supply, or something, and in case there's a flood coming in, our Aware is able to help you identify the direct impact, such as how many people are going to be dead, injuries, destructions of homes, and then indirect impacts on water, sanitation, diseases, children dropping out of school because there's flood. You also go to the next extent by identifying Aware tools can help you in trying to organize focus group discussions. You try to identify already the actions that are required, and then you select within the actions, like I've said, what is important for your situation. It can also help you develop the possible AA protocol, which is emergency response team. Do you need that? Do you need to evacuate people? How do you start planning about the evacuation routes and safe havens? It can also help you, of course, to carry out some, conduct some simulations if you want to, before even the event comes. So some of the interventions that is possible for you to find on Aware was more like about water and sanitation interventions. Is it about restoring livelihood? Is it about educating people? Or it's about restoring shelter and housing? And if it's about shelter and housing, the questions that come in mind is, how do we identify these houses? How do we provide sandbags, for example, as a temporary solutions for eroding or flood that destroy the houses? Mobilize local first aid. So the Aware as a platform helps you to go detailed into all these activities. And finally, budgeting and financing are also a key part of this Aware. So in Hatton, Sri Lanka, simulation, we carried out simulation, for example, in tea communities. And within these tea communities, we did preparedness stage. And the preparedness stage, what we did was that we actually provided a warning, and then the community, the day one is called the preparedness trigger. So we provided the warning, the community consultation, there was some education happening, and then evacuation plan was also done. And then in day two, what we did was also early warning trigger, which is disaster preparation, access to what kind of cash vouchers. You can see we gave some women and children, families actually, we give them cash vouchers so they can prepare adequately for their families in case they evacuate. What would they eat? We also look at landslide areas. What can we do to protect that community from landslide? So preparing ahead of time. And then we can see these women sitting down in one of the evacuation centers in the classroom uphill. So the day three was more about the evacuation process. And the whole simulation actually ends by sending another information about the fact that the flood have recessed. And so people can go back to their houses and take the various caution. So the warning were detailed, and then there's somebody in each community trying to provide those basic information. But this exercise was done in collaboration with a lot of institutions. The Disaster Management Center, Red Cross, World Vision. And so we try to bring all these people together. There were military officers, police. I think I'm somewhere hidden at the back of this picture with the cap up here. So you may not see me so well, but it was an interesting situation that everybody really enjoyed and learned a lot from. So this is Climber. My idea was actually to show you a bit of how it looks like, but looking at the time, I wouldn't want to go there. I'll put the link down and then you can go and have a look, register yourself, and then possibly we can also organize special training sessions if NGOs are interested in using this or helping communities. Is something we can talk about to do that. But in brief, our early warning system, a current early warning system is different from our aware. It's addressed in terms of how the problem is framed, the goals, the timing, the risk perception, action-oriented, and the collaboration is quite different. Aware, whilst framing the problem in a holistic manner, current early warning system actually reacts to more of the immediate risk impacts. In some cases, aware is more proactive than the current early warning system. And not only that, aware, when it comes to risk perception, aware incorporate forward-looking risk assessment in climate disasters risk. But the current ones, what do? They rely mostly on historical data and then trying to estimate the thresholds of disasters that are coming. So aware is different in its entirety when it comes to comparing the current early warning systems with aware. Now with aware also, you'll find that the technology that we are using is state of the art compared to most of the ones. So we are using cloud sources, so countries don't have to spend money managing their own server, but you can also use cloud kind of facilities or infrastructure to run to store or run some of your data analytics. It's user-friendly in terms of what the people need and how they want to use it. The aware is also based on tangible outcomes. All right, it focus on, when you look at the current early warning system, they are focused on issuing alerts and warnings to inform people. But when it comes to aware, it's not only interested in just giving warning, but it's interested in the preparedness of the measures and the resilience that the community will be built, right? And this is measured through tangible indicators. So this is one, even resources. Aware make sure that there's a shared resource from all institutions, because we are involving all the institutions. Instead of one institution carrying out one activity with its own limited in financial resource or human resource, Aware brings together all these institutions to work together within the same environment, transparent process. I wouldn't want to go through all the differences, but I just want to lay this emphasis here. We have a paper that is currently under review, and I hope it comes out, but I can equally contact, if you want more information, we can talk more about this. There are a lot to talk about than the time I'm giving for the session. So, it's emphasized, let me give some lessons that we have derived from developing this particular platform. It emphasizes integration and also promotes multi-scale collaboration. If you want to build an early warning system that is integrative, you really need to emphasize on integration. Because if you deal with the warning in isolation from the action and the finance, the outcome will be very poor. The same way, we need to also look at multi-stakeholder collaboration as NGOs go into communities. Of course, I know community entry is something NGOs really know to do a lot. So, but just to emphasize that if you do this work without the community or the leadership of the ministries, it will not work. And you need to enhance coordination, localize the solution so that it doesn't become some foreign kind of product that they are bringing to us. Capacity building, foster social learning among the people. And importantly, we need to address the technological and financial challenges. In some contexts, you have to bring your own infrastructure because they don't have. In conflict-prone areas, you have to consider the fact that you need more resources for infrastructure. And then the usage must be, the system must also be user-centered designs, something that is intuitive, not too technical language people are using. So for Aware, it's very useful for people all over the ministries who do not know a bit of technicalities. Let me say also that Aware also, one lesson is that you have to prepare for future uncertainties. And in the sense that sometimes you plan that you want to deal with these ministerial people with a lot of bureaucracy, but then it doesn't work because they have their meeting time shift, their priorities are not in line with yours. So there's a lot of uncertainties surrounding this whole issue that we have to look at. recognize political and institutional barriers. I think I've explained a bit more, and it's also very clear to that. So in conclusion, our WER framework addresses the gap in the current early warning systems. It promotes institutions working together and also strengthens anticipatory action from different levels. But also, more importantly, our WER platform also helps in integrating not only the technology part of early warning, but also the social processes that is required for a free flow of information, development of the action, and the financing. Ensures also a comprehensive preparedness and rapid response to disasters. And last of it all, collaboration among stakeholders, of course, to safeguard communities. So that is the conclusion I make. Let me try to position this. I'm not talking about all of them, but to position this into context, going forward, we need to look at how do we provide early warning system to fragile and conflict-prone settings. Are they the same as normal institutions? Because even to provide early warning system in normal institutions, there are a lot of process and complications. So imagine how the conflict will exacerbate this situation. We need to also advance the forecasting techniques. How do people respond to this early warning system? We have to have research that understand that. The women, the people in power, the politicians, how would they react towards this early warning system? Key to this is social learning. How can social learning be leveraged so that people can collectively make decisions and also mobilize resources to respond to the pending hazard that is coming? Multi-level governance support for integrated early warning system and spiritual is important. Decentralization, we don't need only one ministry taking hold of the system and therefore the others don't. In this context, we ensure that all the ministries that are responsible came together so that they can all work in hand from the national to the district level. So sustainable funding models, we need to identify that. Public-private partnership or private financing or government financing or multi-donors. So methodologies to assess economic, of course, social and environmental value of AA and early warning system. We need to do that. Gender consideration in early warning and anticipatory action. And last of it all is resilience building and how AA can influence resilience. So I wouldn't want to. There are so many lessons we derive from it. There are so many areas we have to go to advance in research. So it is my hope that the NGO community, together with academics, can try to explore the research areas around this. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I can hear your comments and also questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. We all admire your stamina to bring two interesting and highly inspiring research projects to our knowledge. To the audience, I see that already a question by Jenny Carrillo from SwissAid regarding the first contribution about co-production of climate information services in Ghana. May I suggest that we will, and also Emmanuel, will answer questions related to the first subject, which is precisely co-production in climate information services in Ghana.
Emmanuel, do you see the question in the chat in Spanish? If needed, I can translate or I can read it out, and then there is an interpreter. So the question from Jenny was regarding, of course, the first presentation as mentioned by Ernst, and it was about to know if there are any methodological description that could help or give clarity on how to link basically bio and indicators that you've presented with climatic event, as she thinks it's a very interesting topic that could be addressed in her reality, and perhaps replicate that research with that magnitude.
So if I understand, you wanted to know whether there is, I mean, the explanation is not really clear to me, if you can make it a bit clearer.
I think from my understanding,
Yeah.
it's about if you have some kind of guidance methodology that could help on how you made the link between the indicators, the bioindicators, with the climatic event, not only in the case of northern Ghana, but also for other areas, I think. But Yenny, if you want to step up and use the mic, and then there is an interpreter that can also translate in English.
Okay. So I think, yes, this work is well documented. I think I see you copied one of the papers. That's more like a reflective paper on that. But I have a lot of publications that 2 key ones are listed here. So those who can see that, and these processes are documented very well there. And if you can you see the screen here? So you can see techniques and skills of indigenous weather and seasonal climate forecast in northern Ghana. And then this one is towards weather and climate services that integrate indigenous and scientific forecasts to improve forecast reliability and acceptability. And particularly even this one also, best of both worlds. That is my PhD thesis about 3 to 4 years ago. So that was where the idea actually started advancing. And so you can find a number of my papers, and these papers have laid down procedure and approaches, of course, as detailed as it should be for a publication. But if you need more information, we can equally also support, especially in building the mobile app and all that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yenny, do you have a further question to Emmanuel in this respect?
You can see that Yenny is muted at the moment, so maybe we can always move on to another question. And let's see.
Exactly.
Oh, we have her answer now.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for the explanation. And she will have a deeper look at it, to your presentation and to the articles. Thanks.
Marvelous. That was a swift exchange. Dear NGO colleagues, would you have other questions or remarks regarding the first contribution of Emmanuel to this exchange?
See one hand from Joachim.
Yes, if I can just tell my question instead of writing in the chat, I think it's a bit easier. My question is also about the combination of the scientific weather forecast and the indigenous forecast. I think it was very impressive that the combination gives better results. And my question is quite a practical one, or maybe 2 questions. First of all, how do you combine it then? If, just to give a practical example, if the traditional weather forecast would say for tomorrow no rain, but the scientific says rain, what is then the combined? Is it half rain, or how do you do it? Is it half-half? This would be the first part of the question. And the second part, what do you then recommend how to disseminate the weather forecast? When disseminating weather forecasts, should you then disseminate it as, well, this is a combined weather forecast where we put in experts, say indigenous experts and scientific experts, or how do you disseminate it?
Yeah, thank you very much, Akin. I think that's a very interesting question. I decided not to go that detail because of time range. So that is true. When it comes to the scientific forecast, for example, for seasonal forecast, there is a probability attached to it. There's a probability for the rainfall to happen, right? So it can be 50%, 65%, and not the opposite is when it will not happen. But when it comes to indigenous forecast, it doesn't have this probability. So the basic thing we started was to try to use the number of people that indicated that it's going to rain, right? And use that as extrapolation of the probability of the event happening. So we use basically a weighted average approach. So that is what we use, yeah. And there is currently another work that is trying to develop a better or improved approach of trying to incorporate, to integrate it. So we didn't integrate from the indicator level, but we integrated from the outcome. So as whether it's going to be rain or no rain. So what is the probability that it's going to rain based on all the farmers that I could say is going to rain, above rainfall, above normal rainfall or near normal rainfall or that. So we combined the probabilities. That's what we did. And now the interesting question is how do you communicate this? So the best thing is to allow the farmers to own the risks. Because if you are in the business of trying to communicate this information and tell the farmers, okay, use the IPF alone and don't use the other one, then they are going to find it challenging in case the results go the other way around. So what we have not done the research to know how they want us to communicate it, but from basic inferences from the conversation, you could see what we try to conclude about is that try to communicate all these three to the farmers. It will shock you how the farmer to farmer and peer to peer kind of conversation, like I mentioned earlier, as an information system will help them make their own decision. But typically, they always prefer, they will say they will prefer, based on the latest evaluation we did, they prefer the IPF, that is the integrated one, because it prevents them from making, from being in a state of confusion, whether there's going to be rain or not. So it's a very good question. You need to find out whether these guys, how will they respond to only IP integrated forecast or only indigenous forecast or even only. And with indigenous forecast, they only know their own forecast and number of farmers around them, but not the entire community, right? So even the indigenous forecast accumulation of a number of people. So that makes it even more reliable from our angle compared to one farmer's own indigenous forecast. So that is, yeah. But a very nice questions for further research. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yo-Yo, for these nice questions. Are there other questions around related to the first contribution of Emmanuel? If not,
Mark has his hand.
Yes, if I can take the tech host hat off and ask a question to Emmanuel. Remembering your work that you presented and the work you did also with Fulco in Wageningen University, I would be interested to know also from the academia perspective how, for example, doing this work and putting at the same level the scientific knowledge and scientific, let's say, forecast and the local, let's say, knowledge and forecast, did that change, let's say, the mindset in some universities? How do you see that? Is there a trend toward that change in the mindset, or what is your experience in academia with this?
Yeah, I mean, the experience at the beginning was very terrible, especially getting the papers published. I was saying in the earlier session that it took me almost about 2 years to get one of these papers published. This is because of the level of skeptical attitude towards this kind of research. So if somebody want to ask more questions, of course, every novel thing takes time, but when you are going to do something like this, people are already entrenched in a position. Scientists are supposed to be open-minded, but it will shock you how many scientists are not really open-minded towards new ideas. And so it is difficult. But the general idea to use indigenous knowledge is gaining grounds. So the IPCC report, there was a research done by James Ford, and that research tried to evaluate the use of indigenous knowledge in IPCC assessment 3 and 4. You can look over, I can look at that paper, James Ford, indigenous knowledge in IPCC report. And he told the results that, he said in the result that the analysis done there is really scanty, or the extent to which indigenous knowledge is involved in this is not so detailed. So we have to make a lot of progress in doing that. And currently, the IPCC is already trying to update its guideline to the next publication, and they are trying to find a very big spot for indigenous knowledge in that. So, and many reports keep on elaborating the point that we need to include indigenous knowledge in the risk assessment and all that. But whether we are doing lip service to the whole terminology or we are trying to just say something so that other native people will feel happy, I can't really tell, but the evidence shows very clearly that we are talking more than we are doing. And so I hope that with this kind of momentum that the idea is getting, people will put in more funding to advance the course. But scientists are very skeptical, yeah. But they find it very interesting sometimes. Most of the places have presented this, they find it very interesting. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for this, your hope that interest will hit common ground and solid ground. May I ask again whether there is a question or a comment related to the second contribution of early warning, early action, early finance? If this is not the case, I would be glad to come to
And there is a question from Santiago.
Sorry, I was not
Please go ahead.
Type it. No, I was just wondering if there is an entry point for private companies to invest in these early warning systems, especially insurances might be interested in something like this. I know that this doesn't apply to all countries because they will not insure just any kind of asset, but insurable ones might be interested to protect their assets by investing in this product.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a very good consideration. And so I am involved in one work in Kenya and Zambia, and it's also a CGR work. And the work is trying to develop a risk management, financial risk management tool. And as part of that work, I advise them on the climate risk issues. So what they're trying to do for the dairy farmers is that we want to improve the financial risks or the climate risks of farmers so that the companies will be able to issue premium based on that. So if you are more highly at risk to climate and also other factors, then they give you higher premium compared to the person who is not. So at the moment, there's even a risk tool that we've developed. I was part of that team. We are still working on trying to include seasonal forecast so that, but we have developed the risks based on the hazard that is coming. So let's say flood risks, what is the level of exposure of this farmer? What is his level of vulnerability? What kind of capacity does he have? So we try to collect all these indicators for vulnerability, sensitivity, and of a particular farmer and his capacity to adapt. And then we use these indicators, trying to aggregate them to estimate the risk score for a farmer. The financial part of the risks in terms of the bank, they already know what kind of calculation they do, how much resources, infrastructure do you have, or collateral do you have, or that. So they want to include this climate risk to that kind of risk to make it more composite kind of risk. So the financial sector has a role to play in this all in terms of financing the idea of developing tools to help farmers, or not only farmers, but everybody else anyway, who will be interested in insuring. But of course, in some countries, flood insurance is near zero. I was in the Netherlands for a while, and it's difficult to get a flood insurance in the Netherlands, I think. Yeah. Because the probabilities are there to see. So, but in countries like Zambia, people are taking even some of the they're developing this kind of risk contingency tool for such services. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, Santiago. other questions? Well, in this case, we will conclude our exchange in time and in beauty. Thank you again very much, Emmanuel, for your willingness to give 2 presentations, one after the other. And as you have seen, people seem to be stunned by your findings. And they certainly will gladly return to similar research you have done or your colleagues have done. And I must say, for my part, I'm very happy that our NGO platform made it possible to exchange with representatives from academia. And as I said this morning, I think this will hopefully motivate both sides to co-design water, weather, and climate services by NGOs, and both will certainly bear a benefit from it.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Jens, for the invitation, and everybody. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's a pleasure always to talk about your work, so it's not a worry at all. Thank you. Okay.
Good.
Bye. Yeah.
This case